My name is Iris Mitchell, and I am 34 years old. 2 weeks ago, I boarded an airplane and flew nearly 3,000 miles across the country, holding a small gold-wrapped box on my lap for the entire journey. It was a 5-hour flight with 2 layovers, and I spent the whole time crammed into a middle seat between 2 strangers, the box balanced carefully on my knees. A flight attendant offered to put in the overhead bin for me, and I thanked her but said no. I needed it close. The box was light, almost weightless really, but somewhere over the middle of the country felt like the heaviest thing I had ever carried in my life. I am my regular life. I work as a hospice nurse in Portland, Oregon. I work on a floor where we stop trying to cure people and start focusing on making them comfortable. My coworkers know me as the calm one, the steady one, the nurse who doesn't cry when things get hard and who sits with grieving families after the doctor delivers bad news, speaking quietly and keeping everyone from falling apart. So when I requested time off, my supervisor assumed I was heading somewhere pleasant, a beach vacation or a wedding. I told her I had to fly back east to keep a promise. She waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. In my line of work, knowing when to stay quiet is half the job. The truth was that I hadn't seen my family in 4 years. I wasn't traveling back for a party, and I certainly wasn't going back for them. I was going back for a woman who could no longer go anywhere herself, a woman who had already passed away. As I ran my thumb over the gold ribbon on that small box, I thought about her and the promise I had made, and I reminded myself that no matter what kind of welcome waited for me when I landed, I was going to place that box on the right table at the right moment. That was the only thing that mattered. I understood exactly what I was walking into. My family had been telling a story about me for years, and everyone they knew believed it. My sister Brooke repeated it at every holiday gathering. My Aunt Lorna told it at church. My mother Carol had woven it so deeply into her identity that it had become her personal truth, something she no longer questioned. The story was simple. I was the daughter who had run away, who had abandoned her family when things got difficult, who had left everyone else to carry the burden alone. I knew that story by heart before I even bought my plane ticket. I bought it anyway. People tend to assume that if your family treats you like a stranger, you must be desperate to win your way back into their good graces. I wasn't desperate for anything. For years ago, I made a deliberate choice to stop talking to them, and I did it calmly and clearly, like closing a door quietly instead of slamming it. By then, I had already built a good life for myself in Oregon. I had a job I loved, a small house with a slightly crooked porch, and a dog named Biscuit who was thoroughly convinced he was a person. I didn't need their party. I needed to finish something that my grandmother had started, and the only way to do that was to go back to the one place I had promised myself I would never visit again. Before I boarded the plane, I gave myself 3 rules. I would not try to explain myself or justify the years I'd been away. I would not defend my choices to people who had already decided what kind of person I was, and I would leave before they cut the cake. I even had my return flight booked for the following morning. The whole trip was supposed to take less than 24 hours. The party was at an upscale resort on the coast of North Carolina. My sister Brooke lives there now, and she has always had a taste for things that look impressive from the outside. She chose the date deliberately, the exact anniversary of our parents' 40th year of marriage, because she has always loved round numbers and grand gestures. My parents had flown in from their farm in Utah. Brooke had rented a large event room with glass doors that opened onto the ocean and strung it with soft lights. Everything was decorated in white and gold, which I noticed with some quiet irony as I walked in carrying a box wrapped in that same shade of gold. There were 60 people in that room, many of them faces I recognized from childhood. Brooke spotted me almost immediately. She crossed the room in expensive shoes, wearing a particular smile she reserves for people she wants to impress, and pulled me into a hug that had no warmth in it. She said she hadn't expected me to show up, and then began steering me toward the exit the way you might guide a confused elderly relative. I didn't resist. I just held the box in my chest and kept looking for the main table. When Brooke stepped away to speak with one of the event staff, I overheard my Aunt Lorna at the bar. She was telling a small group of women that I was the one who had abandoned everyone when my grandmother got sick, that I had left my parents to handle everything alone while I went off and lived my own life. The women glanced over at me. I stood there holding the gift and let their words move past me like water. I have learned, through years of sitting beside people at the worst moments of their lives, that people will always carry a version of you inside their heads that has nothing to do with who you actually are. In their version, I was selfish and cold. I could have walked over and corrected them. I didn't. I had a specific task to complete for someone else, and the moment hadn't come why to understand why any of this mattered. You have to understand my grandmother, Della. She was the steadiest presence of my childhood. My parents were always occupied with the farm and with each other, and Brooke was always absorbed in her own world. So my summers belonged to Nana. Her house smelled like bread and old wood. She taught me how to grow vegetables, how to repair things that were broken, and how to stay calm and gentle when an animal was frightened or in pain. She used to say that you have to show up for the people who cannot show up for themselves. She was talking about the farm animals and the neighbors, but she was also, I think, talking about herself. She always wore the same gold wedding ring, even when she was working in the garden or kneading dough. I watched her move through difficulty with more grace than anyone I have ever known, before or since. That ring, and everything it represented to me, is a large part why I became the person I am 0.6 years ago. Nana began to forget things. She would leave the stove burning or call me by my mother's name. After she fell badly one afternoon, the family gathered to discuss what to do next. Brooke had already drafted a plan. She wanted to sell Nana's farmhouse and move her into an inexpensive care facility so that the proceeds could go toward our parents' retirement fund. She laid it out efficiently, like a business proposal. I asked who would visit her regularly. The room went quiet. That was when I said I would move back and take care of her myself. I was 28 years old. I had a life I had spent years building in Portland, friends, and a relationship, and a career I was proud of. I left it all. Brooke laughed and told me I wouldn't manage a month of it. My mother said I was being dramatic. 1 week later, I was driving back to that farmhouse to begin a chapter of my life that nobody in my family would ever fully witness or acknowledge. For 6 years, I was there. I learned every one of Nana's medications, every sound the old house made in the night, every shift in her breathing that signaled something I needed to pay attention to. I bathed her and fed her and sat with her through the hard nights. My family visited, on average, once or twice a year. I lost my relationship because my partner couldn't bear the distance and the weight of it. I spent down my savings. I watched my friendships thin out from neglect, and I would do every bit of it again without hesitation because Nana was worth it. She was worth all of it. In her final weeks, when she could barely stay awake for more than a few hours at a time, she gave me a small cedar box. Inside it was a letter and her gold ring. She held my hands and made me promise to deliver that box to my mother on the day of their 40th anniversary party. I told her I would. She looked at me for a long time without speaking, and then she thanked me in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear. 3 days later, she was gone. I was holding her hand. After the funeral, the family arrived and grieved loudly and blamed me for keeping her isolated in that old farmhouse instead of letting her spend her final years properly socialized in a care facility. I didn't argue with them. There was no point. I drove back to Oregon, and I let the silence between us grow into something permanent. Then my cousin Maddie sent me screenshots from a family group chat I wasn't part of. They were discussing the anniversary party. There was a message saying I wasn't invited, and another from my father saying he would handle things if I showed up. I read those messages, and then I opened my laptop and bought a plane ticket that a promise to a dying woman means more than a threatening text message. That is something I know with complete certainty, the party. The music was light and cheerful, and everyone looked happy and well-dressed. My parents sat at the head table. My mother was in a red dress, looking genuinely lovely, and my father was leaning back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man celebrating something he was proud of. I stood at the edge of the room for a moment and felt, briefly, like the child I used to be, the one who wanted nothing more than to belong at the table. But I knew there was no seat for me there, and I wasn't looking for one. I took the same slow breath I take at work before delivering difficult news, and I walked directly toward them. When my mother saw me coming, her laughter stopped as though someone had cut the sound. She asked what I was doing there, and her voice was flat and cold. I told her I had a gift from Nana, and that I would leave as soon as I had delivered it. Just the mention of Nana's name seemed to unsettle her. Brooke materialized on my elbow and gripped my arm, whispering urgently that I needed to leave and not ruin this for everyone. I kept moving. I set the gold box on the table in front of my mother and told her it was from Nana. She wouldn't touch it. She told the room I hadn't been invited. Brooke called me a scene maker and grabbed for my arm again. And then my father stood up. He said they didn't want anything from a daughter who had abandoned her family, and he swept the box off the table with his hand. IT hit the floor hard. The lid came off, and Nana's gold ring rolled across the polished floor in a wide, glittering arc the room when completely silent. An older woman named Ruth Calloway, who had been Nana's closest friend for decades, bent down and picked it up. When she saw what it was, she made a sound that cut through the quiet like something breaking open. She told my mother, in front of everyone, that I was the only one who had truly cared for Della in her final years, that I had been there every single day, that I had held her hand when she died. I picked up the envelope that had fallen from the box, placed the ring carefully back inside, and told my mother she could have it, but I would not let it be thrown on the floor a second time. Then I walked out into the night air and didn't look back a few days later. I mailed a letter to Janet. Nana wrote that she knew the family had stayed away during her illness, and that she had forgiven them because she understood that fear makes people behave badly. But she also wrote, clearly and without any softness to cushion it, that I was the only one who had stayed. She told my mother that a real family is built from the people who show up when things are hard and unglamorous and exhausting, not just when there is something to celebrate. She said she hoped my mother would understand that before it was too late to do anything about it. Why parents read that letter together. And then they got in their car and drove 14 hours through the night to stand on my doorstep in Portland. When I opened the door and saw them there, looking tired and diminished and genuinely sorry, I didn't throw my arms around them. I didn't cry with relief. I told them that things between us would have to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, and entirely on my terms. I told them that the story they had been telling about me would need to be corrected out loud to every person who had ever heard it. They agreed to all of it, and they have kept their word. My mother volunteers now at a care facility near their farm. She spends her afternoons sitting with people who have no family nearby, doing for them what she couldn't bring herself to do for her own mother. She wears Nana's ring every day. I didn't do any of what I did because I wanted recognition. I didn't stay at that farmhouse for 6 years so that someone would eventually tell me I was right. I did it because Nana asked me to show up, and showing up is something I know how to do. The recognition, when it finally came, was not a reward. It was just a truth, arriving late, the way truth often does. What I carry with me now is simpler than any of that. I know that I kept my promise. I know whose hand I was holding at the end. And I know that when the moment came and the room was silent and that gold ring was rolling across the floor, the truth didn't need me to say a single word on its behalf. It spoke entirely for itself.